Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. The Portland night settled like a thin, damp blanket, not freezing, just enough to make people pull their collars higher and wonder what they were doing outside at this hour. Nora Wren stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, the pale white bathroom light laying bare the tired shadows beneath her eyes like an honest report. On the bed lay the dress Jenna had approved that afternoon. Deep blue, clean lines, just polished enough to look like a woman who had it together. Nora looked at it the way one looks at a luxury item that doesn't belong to them, something that might make her happy. And because of that, she didn't dare put it on. She reached out and touched the fabric, then pulled her hand back, as if afraid the dress might say out loud what she was hiding. That she too craved the feeling of being looked at with appreciation. Nora chose a faded cream-colored blouse, its collar softened by too many washes, and a pair of loose jeans that slipped slightly at the waist. She deliberately didn't tighten the drawstring, as if placing a punctuation mark in advance for the date. No lipstick, no mascara. Her hair was hastily tied back with a black elastic. Looking into the mirror, she saw a version of herself so ordinary she could disappear into a crowd. Right, she said to herself softly. Let the truth do the work. Her phone vibrated. Jenna. Nora picked up before she could speak, and her best friend's voice burst through like breaking news. Nora Wren, tonight is a soft launch. Jenna, I'm just going to dinner, Nora cut in, as if reassuring herself. Jenna snorted. Yeah, just dinner. With an ER doctor, Liam Carter. Texts are overly polite, replies are just long enough, no stupid emojis. That's exactly why you have to test him. Nora glanced at the mirror again. I am testing him. Good. Test, but don't turn yourself into stone. Jenna paused, her voice lowering, gentler, like touching a familiar wound. You deserve to be treated well, even when you're wearing a faded shirt. Nora swallowed a lump in her throat. I know. Okay, go. And if you need a clean exit, text pineapple. I'll fake an emergency. Nora laughed, this time genuinely. You're insane. I'm a lifesaver. Go. The call ended. Nora slipped on a light jacket and stepped out of the apartment, like stepping out of an old safe zone. Cramped, but familiar. The restaurant wasn't flashy, but it had an elegance that made people straighten their backs. A revolving glass door, golden light spilling out like honey, the scent of butter and black pepper hanging in the air. Nora breathed in, feeling as if she were carrying a secret, one she had deliberately dressed down, to see how she would be treated without a shell. She had barely crossed the threshold when the maitre d' looked up. His gaze swept quickly, from her hastily tied hair, down to the faded blouse, the loose jeans, and then her shoes. A very slight frown, just enough for Nora to know. She had been filed under no reservation. Reservation? He asked, polite but lacking warmth. Nora Wren, she replied, keeping her voice steady, under Liam Carter. The name dropped like a key card. The maitre d's expression shifted instantly, his smile snapping into place as smoothly as a lock turning. Ah, yes, this way. Nora followed him past clinking glasses and low conversation. Everything seemed to reflect back at her. Soft laughter, cutlery, glancing looks. She made herself not hunch her shoulders. A test was a test, but her self-respect still had to stand upright. And then she saw him. Liam Carter sat near the window. The Portland night reflected behind him in the glass like blurred neon streaks. He wore a light blue shirt, sleeves neatly rolled, no tie. Not the showy, rich doctor type, just clean and put together, like someone who respected the date and himself. Nora slowed for half a beat, bracing for the moment she had bet on. A disappointed look, a faltering smile, a calculating glance. But no. Liam stood up as soon as he saw her. He pulled out her chair, the movement easy, unshowy. His smile was so calm it threw Nora off, as if she weren't a problem to solve, but a person he genuinely wanted to meet. Nora, he said, his voice low enough to cut through the surrounding noise. Nice to finally meet you in person. Nice to meet you too, she replied, her hands tightening in her lap for a second before she let go, keeping herself in observer mode. They began with safe topics: traffic, parking. But Nora stayed on guard. She watched everything, whether his eyes flicked back to her clothes, whether his tone shifted. Liam did none of what she was waiting for. He asked about her workday, about the library, about the books she'd mentioned in texts. He remembered the authors' names, even remembered that Nora had once said she liked stories that made people able to breathe again. "You work at the public library, right?" he asked. "Yeah." Nora took a sip of water. "Municipal. It's, nothing special." Liam lifted his eyebrows slightly, as if objecting to an unfair statement. "Public libraries are always special. They're the only place you can walk into without having to buy anything just to be allowed to exist." The words stopped Nora short. In her head, the alarm siren that was always blaring went silent for a beat, as if it didn't know how to respond to understanding that demanded nothing. She tested him with a small piece of bait, her tone casual. "You're different in person. Your profile looked kind of serious." Liam smiled. "Photos are frozen moments. They're not good at telling stories." "So what do you like better?" "Real people," he said, meeting her eyes without looking away. "Not the packaged version." Nora felt her face warm, not from being flirted with, but because the words felt like someone gently removing a piece of armor from her shoulders without causing pain. She asked about his job. Liam talked about the ER like a place full of cold light and hot emotions. Long shifts, split-second decisions, in small moments. When a frightened patient grabbed his hand, and all he needed to say was, "I'm here." He didn't tell it to be admired. He spoke like someone stating the reality of his life, what he had chosen because it fit him. When Nora mentioned that she'd been a little tight lately, she waited for an offer of help or a hollow reassurance. "Everything will be okay." But Liam only nodded slowly, as if acknowledging difficulty was a form of respect. "Life gets tight," he said, "like walking a wire. Every bill is a gust of wind." Nora laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one. She surprised herself. The test in her head began to crack and fall away, like thin ice under sunlight. Liam watched her laugh, his gaze softening. "I like that laugh," he said, just lightly enough to avoid sounding like a line. "It sounds like you forgot to hold your breath for a second." Nora froze. Too accurate. She had been holding her breath for years, as if relaxing would mean sinking. Dinner flowed like a calm river. They talked about the smell of old paper, Portland rain, about whether people read to escape or to search. Nora talked about her mother, a woman who used to take her volunteering as a child, as a way of teaching her not to be afraid of life. Liam talked about his mother, Marisol, a resilient woman who once divided a loaf of bread into 4 parts so everyone could eat. These stories weren't told to show hardship or strength. They were like small stones placed between them, steadying a bridge. When the check came, Nora reflexively reached for her wallet. "We can split it." Liam placed his hand on the bill, not stopping her, just keeping the moment from turning into a contest. "Tonight's on me. Next time. If you want there to be a next time, you choose the place and you pay." The way he said, "if you want," made Nora feel she had a choice, one she rarely allowed herself in relationships. She just nodded, afraid that if she spoke, her voice would reveal how soft she felt. They stepped outside. Cold air brushed her cheeks. The night street opened up, exhaling distant traffic sounds. Nora stood beside Liam under the pale yellow streetlight, tugging her jacket closed, realizing that goodbyes were always the most dangerous moments, because they forced her to decide, take one more step or retreat and win the familiar battle. She took a breath and spoke plainly, like cutting a cord inside herself. "I need to confess, I dressed like this on purpose to test you." In her head, Jenna was shouting soft launch like a referee, and Nora suddenly felt foolish and awful, like she'd played a childish game with a decent man. Liam wasn't surprised, not annoyed. He just nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know." Nora blinked. You're not the first," Liam said calmly. "People test when they're afraid." Her throat tightened. So, did it bother you? Liam shook his head. No? He paused, choosing his words carefully, as if not to unsettle her further. I'm just glad you came. The sentence landed between them like a warm towel placed over her shoulders. No demands, no reproach, just the acknowledgement that Nora's presence, whether in a faded shirt or a beautiful dress, still mattered. Nora smiled, very small, but her heart was anything but. It beat as it had just run free from an old confining place. The Portland night wind was colder than Nora expected. It didn't slap her in the face. It slipped down her collar, crept into her sleeves, like a gentle but firm reminder. Tonight was not a dream. In front of the restaurant, yellow light spilled into a soft streak across the wet sidewalk. Cars passed in the distance, tires hissing against thin water, the city breathing slowly. Nora stood beside Liam, her hands buried in her coat pockets to hide her cold fingers and her unsteady heartbeat. She meant to say good night and retreat out of habit, to leave quickly before happiness had a chance to cling to her. But Liam wasn't in a hurry. He stood there, shoulders straight, his gaze calm like deep water. The way he stayed silent didn't make Nora feel abandoned. It felt as if he were giving her time to choose. Nora started, then stopped. Her throat was dry. I'm sorry about. No need, Liam said softly. I understand. Those words, I understand, only unsettled Nora more, as if she had run into what she thought was a wall and found a curtain instead. She lowered her gaze to the tips of her shoes, wanting to hide the tremor in her eyes. Liam leaned slightly, like someone considering a very small step forward. Nora. She looked up. In Liam's hand was a white envelope. No logo, no pattern, no writing, just a perfectly clean piece of white paper, so pristine it felt cold. Nora froze instantly. Her reflex was faster than reason. In her mind, a memory snapped awake like metal hitting tile. Another night, another man, a half smile, and an envelope shoved into her hand, as if she were something that could be priced, bought, returned. Nora's hand curled tighter inside her pocket. Her nails dug into her palm until it hurt. Liam, her voice came out hoarse, as a string pulled too tight. That is not what you think, Liam said immediately, but still calm. He looked straight at her, not avoiding her eyes. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable. I just didn't know another way to give it to you. Nora swallowed, a chill running down her spine. Then, why an envelope? Liam exhaled, his breath turned into a thin mist. Because I want you to open it yourself. And because, he paused, choosing his words. What? This is something that belongs to you, not something I'm imposing on you. Nora stared at the envelope. It was still white, still silent. But the way Liam held it wasn't the way others had before. Not hurried, not condescending. Just careful, like someone holding something fragile. I don't. Nora shook her head, instinctively stepping half a step back. Liam didn't move forward. He only lowered his hand slightly, placing the envelope at a height where she could take it. Or not. You don't have to accept it if you don't want to. I just think you should know. Know what? Nora asked, almost in a whisper. Liam looked at her for a long moment. About a very long time ago, he said. About something you may have forgotten. Nora didn't understand why her heart was pounding so hard. She wasn't used to openings that sounded like fate. She hated them. They usually came with manipulation. But Liam didn't speak like someone setting a scene. He spoke like someone who had carried something for too long and finally didn't want to carry it alone. Nora pulled her hand out of her pocket. Her fingers trembled slightly in the cold air. She reached out and took the envelope, the thin paper brushing her skin like a small electric shock. It was light, no thickness of cash, no sharp edges on a card, just something flat, a sheet of paper, a photograph. Nora stood under the yellow light, holding the envelope as if it were both frightening and intriguing. I swear, Liam said, his voice low, I would never make you feel like you're being priced. That sentence hit exactly where Nora kept things buried deepest. She didn't answer. She just looked at the envelope, then slowly slid her thumb along the edge. Paper rustled. Inside was an old photograph. At a glance, Nora saw the color of time. Slightly yellowed, soft corners, edges worn as if it had been turned over again and again. She pulled the photo out, and the world around her seemed to slow by a beat. The picture showed an old building, white fluorescent lights, light-colored walls peeling near the baseboards, a long table, plastic trays, large pots, people standing in line. And in the corner of the frame, slightly angled, was a girl in a knit hat, her hair neatly braided, bending down to hand a food container to someone outside the frame. The girl wore no makeup, of course, her face still young, her eyes more serious than her age. On her coat was a handwritten sticker, volunteer. Nora was looking at herself, 14, 15 years old. Her heart tightened, as if someone had squeezed a handful of memories she thought she'd stored away safely. She remembered the smell of hot soup, the sound of spoons hitting bowls, her mother's hand resting on her shoulder whenever she hesitated before someone shaking from the cold. She remembered her mother saying, "No pity, respect." But Nora didn't remember this photograph. She didn't remember who had taken it. She didn't remember that moment ever being frozen in time. She looked up at Liam, eyes wide. How do you have this?" Liam didn't smile. He didn't look surprised or triumphant. He just looked at Nora as if she were something very real. "Acacia Shelter," he said. Hearing the name, Nora's heart gave a small jolt. "Acacia?" "Yeah," Liam swallowed. "I was there." Nora shook her head instinctively. "That's impossible. I don't remember you." "I know," Liam said at once, as if he'd expected it. "And I don't blame you. You met a lot of people there. You were just a kid volunteering with your mom." Nora looked back down at the photo. The girl in it looked so serious, as if she were doing the most important thing in the world. "Were you the boy outside the frame?" Nora asked, her voice trembling. Liam nodded slowly. "I was 18. My mom had lost her job. My younger brother was in the hospital. Our family hit bottom faster than I ever imagined. Acacia was where we ate dinner for a few weeks." Nora felt an invisible weight pull at her chest. Then the photo. "A volunteer took it," Liam said. "Years later, when I was doing better, I went back, just to say thank you, and they showed me the old photos." Nora held the picture with both hands. Her fingers were still shaking, but now the tremor wasn't fear. It was like her body reacting to touching a part of her life that hadn't been named in a very long time. "You recognized me?" Nora asked, a question she didn't even know how she wanted answered. Liam met her eyes. "I recognized your eyes." Nora closed her eyes for a second. The words were simple, but they struck the softest place. "That day," Liam continued, his voice dropping, "you handed me a box of food. You looked at me, not like I was pathetic, not like I was a problem. You looked at me like a normal person, like I still had dignity." Nora felt her throat tighten. She didn't realize how tightly she was gripping the photo until her knuckles turned white. "I don't remember what you said," Liam said, the corner of his mouth pulling into the faintest sad smile. "Maybe you didn't say anything at all. But that look," he paused, searching for the right word, "it held me together. It made me believe I could still stand up." Nora opened her mouth, but no words fit. She just looked at Liam, at the way he stood under the streetlight, the wind ruffling his hair. And suddenly he was no longer just a man she met on an app. He was part of a circle she hadn't known she started drawing when she was 15. "So, why tell me now?" Nora asked softly. Liam exhaled, mist drifting from his lips like a gentle confession. "Because I didn't want you to feel trapped by the past. I wanted to meet you as who you are now. You have the right to walk away if you want." Nora glanced down at her faded shirt. The test suddenly felt small and naive. She had tried to prove that he didn't judge appearances, while he had been carrying proof that, for a very long time, what he remembered about her had never been about clothes. Nora searched her memory. She remembered the lines of people, the trembling hands, her mother's voice saying, "Respect." But the face of the 18-year-old boy remained blurred, like pencil lines washed away by rain. She looked up, her eyes wet. I don't remember you, she said apologetically. Liam shook his head. That's okay. I remember enough. A simple sentence, but it hurt Nora in a warm way. Nora held the photograph, and suddenly it felt heavy, like a message from the past. You were once this kind of person. You once looked at the world with kindness. Don't let it disappear just because you're afraid of being hurt. She looked at Liam, then back at the photo. Her heart didn't remember the boy's face, but it recognized the truth in his voice. The truth of someone who had walked through darkness and still chose to speak of light in an ordinary tone. And Nora understood, clearly, with a chill down her spine and warmth in her chest. This date was no longer just a date. It was a door opening, revealing a connection that had begun long ago, before the messages, before the app, before this cold, damp Portland night. Nora tightened her grip on the photograph, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't know whether she should retreat or stay and face what was finding its way back to her. That night, Nora barely slept. The photograph lay on the kitchen table like an object with its own gravity, not because the paper was thick, but because it pulled an entire stretch of her adolescence back against her heart. Nora paced between the living room and the kitchen, poured herself water twice and forgot to drink it, opened her phone 3 times and shut it again. She had met men who talked about destiny like a trap, but Liam didn't tell a story. He had simply placed the truth in her hands and stepped back, as if the choice had always been hers. That unsettled her even more. What kind of coincidence was so perfectly aligned? An online date, a decent man, an envelope, a photograph from more than a decade ago. It sounded like a script, and Nora hated scripts because scripts usually asked her to play the role of the lucky girl, while real life had rarely been generous. At 1:17 a.m., she texted Jenna a single line, "I think I just walked into a movie." Jenna called back immediately. Her voice was alert, like someone just off a night shift in the ER, even though Jenna didn't work there. "Okay, breathe. Start from the beginning," Jenna said. Nora told her everything, from the white envelope to the photograph, from Acacia Shelter to the words, "I recognized your eyes." When Nora finished, Jenna was silent for a beat, then let out a long breath. "Sounds like a movie," Jenna concluded, which is exactly why it needs verification. Nora leaned back in her chair, her eyes still glued to the photograph on the table. "I know, but his eyes weren't fake." "Eyes can act," Jenna said practically. Then her tone softened. "But yes, some things can't be faked for long. Let me do the CSI part. Don't kill yourself with overthinking." Nora smiled faintly, though the weight in her chest didn't lift. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to do what I do best, ethical stalking," Jenna replied casually. "Give me his full name." "Dr. Liam Carter. Hospital. Providence? Or—" He said a public hospital. I don't remember the name. "Okay, you sleep. I'll work." "Jenna, sleep now." Nora hung up, but sleep didn't come right away. She looked at the photograph again. The girl in it looked serious to the point of being almost funny. 15 years old, already knowing how to hold her gaze steady, how to hand food over as if it were something ordinary, without sprinkling pity on top. Nora tried to dig through her memory. Was it cold that day or raining? What color coat had her mother been wearing? Had they volunteered every Saturday? All she could retrieve were fragments. The smell of soup, low voices talking, her mother's reminder like a mantra. Respect. The next morning, Nora arrived at the library with faint circles under her eyes. She tried to work as usual, checking books in, labeling spines, smiling at a little girl clutching a copy of Charlotte's Web. But every free moment, her thoughts slid back to the photograph, slid back to Liam's eyes when he said, "I remember enough." By noon, Jenna sent a string of messages, as fast as a downpour. Liam Carter has a real physician record, ER doctor, works at a public hospital, one of the major facilities in Portland, appeared in last year's fundraising news, participates in community outreach, free health clinics plus homeless clinic support, no signs of married but on an app. Nora stared at the screen, a lightness passing through her chest, not explosive joy, but the feeling of ice melting at one corner. She turned off the screen and looked out the library window. That afternoon, Liam texted, "How are you today?" Then another line, "I don't want to make you uncomfortable because of the photo. If you want to talk, I'm here." No exclamation points, no pressure, just an open door. Nora stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "I want to understand. And I also want to believe." Liam called her after work. His voice on the other end was slightly hoarse, the kind of hoarseness that came from a long shift, but still calm. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know," Nora said honestly. "It all feels too coincidental." Liam was quiet for a beat, as if accepting that truth alongside her. "I feel that way too. That's why I didn't tell you right away." "Then why did you keep the photo?" His voice softened. "Because it reminds me of something very basic. When you're at the bottom, what saves you sometimes isn't money or promises. It's just being looked at as a human being." Nora swallowed. "I was just a kid following my mom." "That's exactly why it was real," Liam said. "You weren't doing it to be seen. You did it because that's how you were taught. And I lived off that longer than you might think." Nora closed her eyes, feeling as though someone had placed a warm hand at the center of her chest. Not to pull her anywhere, just to remind her that her heart was still beating. "Did you ever try to find me?" she asked, the hardest question. Liam exhaled. "No, I wasn't brave enough to turn it into a search. I went back to Acacia a few times to volunteer, then life carried me away. It wasn't until I saw you on the app that I realized. And I was scared, afraid you'd think I was strange, afraid you'd feel like you were being set up inside a story." That made Nora fall silent. She was about to say more when the desk phone at the librarian's counter rang. Nora excused herself, hung up, and hurried out. Her department head called her into the small meeting room in the back. The room smelled of paper and old printer ink. A stack of folders sat on the table, and her supervisor's face was so serious that Nora already knew the ending before she heard it. "Nora," her supervisor said heavily, "the city just sent a notice. Next quarter's budget is being cut. The community program may have to be suspended." A ringing filled Nora's ears. That same morning, she'd still been reeling from a beautiful coincidence. Now life reminded her plainly, beauty doesn't pay bills. She nodded, forcing herself to stay composed. "Cut? How much?" Her supervisor sighed. "Enough that we'll have to choose." Nora stepped out of the room, her hands icy even though the library was warm. She stood between the shelves, hearing children laugh in the reading corner, hearing pages turn softly like rain. In her pocket, her phone vibrated. A message from Liam appeared. "If anything's wrong, tell me." Nora looked at the words, then at the rows of books in front of her. She tightened her grip on the phone. Her unease wasn't only about Liam anymore. It was also about the library she loved, about the fact that it might soon be cut out of other people's lives. The budget cut announcement didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It came like water seeping through a ceiling, at first just a small yellow stain, then spreading into a damp patch everyone could see, yet everyone pretended not to notice so they could keep working. The next morning, Nora stood in front of the library's activity schedule board, holding a marker as if it were something that could save lives. Story hour for preschoolers, after-school reading club for kids who were left behind because their parents worked late, senior tech help for the grandmothers who liked printing photos of their grandchildren. All those lines suddenly looked like thin leaves, one strong gust of budget cuts, and they would fall away. "What can we keep?" a coworker asked softly, as if afraid of knocking something else loose. Nora looked at each item and each time slot, as if seeing invisible faces. She thought of Eli, the third grader who always hovered in the comic corner because no one paid attention to him at home. She thought of the girl who always asked for just one more page, because home meant shouting. To Nora, the library wasn't just books. It was a place where people didn't get swallowed. "Keep the children's reading programs," Nora said, steadier than she felt. "At least that." She started moving like someone chasing a bus about to pull away, collecting signatures, calling small donors, knocking on local cafe doors, emailing the Parents Association. She printed flyers with cheap ink and taped them to the bulletin board, like sticking a Band-Aid over a bleeding wound. At noon, Liam texted, "How are you today?" Nora stared at the message for a long moment. What she wanted to say was, "I'm holding a leaking boat together with my bare hands." But she typed instead, "The library's budget got cut." Her phone rang immediately. "You're at the library?" Liam asked, the same calm tone, but with something tighter underneath. "Yeah. Can I come by?" Nora glanced around. The shelves, the front desk, children whispering. "You don't need to. I can handle it." "I'm not questioning your ability," Liam said slowly. "I just want to help." The word help made heat creep up the back of Nora's neck. Not because she was upset with Liam, but because help had always come with a price in her life. Owing someone, being looked down on, having it brought up again, being turned into a story told by someone else. "I don't want to owe anyone," Nora said bluntly. The silence on the other end wasn't long, but it was long enough for Nora to feel the wall she just built. Then Liam spoke, very gently. "Then don't owe me. I'm not offering you a favor. I'm just participating." "How is that different?" "It is," Liam replied. "Because participating doesn't put you below me. It puts me beside you." Nora bit her lip. She hated how easily her heart softened at a sentence that rang true. "What are you thinking of doing?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay practical. "I have an idea," Liam said. "My hospital runs weekend outreach programs. I could propose a joint activity, a book drive, collect books for the library, and at the same time set up a small reading corner in the pediatric waiting area. Both places need it." Nora closed her eyes for a second. In her mind, she saw doctors in white coats standing next to boxes of donated books. It was a little absurd and somehow beautiful, and that beauty scared her. "Liam, Not my money," Liam interrupted softly, resetting the boundary so she wouldn't panic. "Not me writing a check and you having to say thank you. Just me telling my colleagues, if you have books at home, bring them in. Books are objects. You don't owe me for objects." Nora was quiet. She looked through the glass doors and saw a little boy sitting cross-legged in the reading corner, hugging a book like a life preserver. "I'm afraid," Nora admitted, her voice smaller, "afraid that if I accept something kind, I'll have to pay for it by letting someone step into my life." On the other end, Liam exhaled. "You don't have to pay for anything you don't want to." He paused. "Just tell me this. Do you want the library to live?" That question brought Nora back to center. The library, the children, rainy afternoons, pages that save people in the quietest way possible. "Yes," she said clearly, "I do." "Then let me participate," Liam replied. Nora swallowed, then nodded even though he couldn't see it. "Okay." That afternoon, Liam sent her a simply designed poster. Book drive. Give a story a second life. Below it were the hospital and library logos side by side, neither above the other. Nora looked at the two names together and felt as if someone had handed her a beam to cross a rushing river. She was taping the poster to the bulletin board when her phone started vibrating nonstop. Jenna was flooding her with messages like a fire alarm. "Nora, you're trending. Restaurant clip." Nora froze. The marker in her hand left a black smear on the poster like a bruise. "What clip?" she typed, her fingers icy. Jenna sent a link, followed by the line, "Someone filmed you walking into the restaurant." Captions like, "She was looked down on for wearing cheap clothes." Nora tapped it. The screen showed her stepping through the revolving door. The maitre d' scanned her from head to toe. A raised eyebrow. A smile changed instantly when he heard the name Liam Carter. Everything was clear enough to be humiliating. Nora heard her heart pounding against her ribs like a knock at a door. She felt as if the entire library were staring at her, even though no one knew. A comment floated up. He stood up like she was the only person in the room. Another, "This is why people hate fancy places." Then more people started asking, "Who's the man?" Nora shut off the screen as if extinguishing a flame. But the fire didn't go out. It had already spread, running through the city faster than she could control. She stood in the middle of the library, surrounded by the smell of paper and old ink, and suddenly understood. She had been trying to save a reading program while life was preparing to throw her into a much bigger story. The next morning, Nora woke to her phone vibrating so hard it felt like someone was knocking directly on her bones. Messages, notifications, mentions, everything piled on top of one another, thick as falling snow. She opened her eyes in Portland's gray light, and the first thing she saw was her own face on someone else's screen. The restaurant clip had traveled farther than Jenna predicted. Nora pulled the blanket around herself and sat up, her heart pounding. Not the usual kind of fear, but the feeling of being stripped bare in front of a crowd. Beneath the video were thousands of comments. Some people were angry on her behalf, some pitied her, some liked Liam for standing up and pulling out her chair, and others did what Nora hated most. They built a story about her as if she were a character they owned. She's probably really poor. You can tell she was testing a rich doctor. Men like that are so rare. Probably just PR. Nora read a few lines and stopped. Each word was like a small needle. Not enough to kill, but enough to make her want to escape her own name. At the library, the atmosphere shifted the moment Nora walked in. No one said anything outright, but people's gazes lingered on her longer than usual. One co-worker looked at her and quickly turned away, as if afraid Nora might catch the curiosity. An intern stared wide-eyed and finally couldn't hold it in. "Ms. Nora, are you—" Nora forced a smile. "No, I mean, yes, it's me. But I'm also just me." She hated that phrase, just me. It sounded like she was apologizing for existing. By mid-morning, emails began flooding the library inbox. People wanting to donate books, people offering sponsorships, people asking to interview Nora about her inspiring story. A local reporter even requested a filming schedule. Nora looked at the list and felt like she was standing between two doors, one that could save the library and one that would feed her life into the grinder of public opinion. At noon, Liam called. "Are you okay?" His voice sounded hoarse. He had probably just come off a shift. "I'm accidentally famous," Nora replied, trying to joke, but her laugh didn't land. "I'm sorry," Liam said immediately. "I didn't want you dragged into this." "It's not your fault." Nora looked out the window, rain falling like fine dust. "But I can't stand people thinking they have the right to judge every centimeter of my life." "You don't owe anyone an explanation," Liam said. "You only have to do what you want to do." What she wanted to do. Nora closed her eyes. She wanted the library to live. She wanted Acacia to live. She wanted those quietly decent places not to disappear from the city. Just as the call ended, an unfamiliar number rang. Nora was about to ignore it when a name she thought she had locked in the past appeared on the screen. Trent Hale. Her finger froze. She didn't answer, but Trent texted immediately, as if he already knew she would stay silent. "Nora, are you okay? I saw the clip. I'm worried about you." Nora stared at the words, a bitter laugh rising in her chest. The man who had once turned "I'm worried about you" into a leash was knocking again, right when the whole city was watching her. She didn't reply, but Trent didn't stop. "I just want to make sure you're not being used. Those rich doctor types, you know how they are. They like playing savior. Be careful. Don't let yourself become their PR story." Nora felt her stomach go cold. Trent had always known how to plant a small, poisonous seed in exactly the right place. Her fear of being used, judged, turned into an object in someone else's hands. And what made it worse was, she hadn't invented that fear. It had happened before. She shoved the phone into her pocket like tucking away a knife. Jenna texted, "Don't reply to Trent. He doesn't care. He smells the spotlight." Nora replied with a single word, "Okay." But the word didn't calm her heart. At the end of the day, the library called an emergency meeting. Her supervisor stood in front of everyone, face serious but eyes bright, the rare brightness of someone who saw an opening. "There's an organization willing to fund us if we can prove community impact," her supervisor said. "Going viral could be leverage." Nora heard the word leverage and felt like a steel bar being placed under a weight. But she also knew, if they missed this chance, the reading programs would die. And death here meant children losing a place to shelter. She nodded. "I'll write the proposal. And the book drive with the hospital. We'll move fast." That night, Nora sat surrounded by paperwork, her eyes gritty with exhaustion, when the computer screen in the office flashed a new city bulletin, its headlines slicing across the screen like a blade. City announces redevelopment plan for Acacia site. Nora read it, each word dropping into her chest. The Acacia land, the site where the old community center and temporary shelter once stood, had been placed on the redevelopment list, which meant demolition, erasure, replacing it with something better. Nora let go of the mouse. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Viral had just opened a door for her to save the library, and life immediately opened another door, darker, larger, the threat of erasing a place that had once saved both her and Liam. The community hall that night was lit by the kind of light that never flatters anyone. White fluorescent bulbs, rows of folding chairs, the smell of cheap coffee and freshly printed paper. On the wall hung a neighborhood map, red marker circling the location of Acacia. A small circle, but to Nora it felt like an entire piece of her life had been outlined. Nora arrived early, carrying the library's folders in an unfinished proposal. She told herself, I'm here for this place, not for the clip, not for the comments. But when she walked in, she still heard the murmurs like wind slipping through library shelves. That's her. The woman from the video. She looks pretty ordinary in real life. Nora tried not to react. She spotted Liam in the middle row. He wore a dark jacket, his hair still slightly messy, like someone who'd just run over from the hospital. When he saw her, he stood up, an instinctive courtesy that now worked like a shield, pulling Nora out of the surrounding stares and giving her something solid to stand beside. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Nora nodded, though she wasn't sure. Okay, in the sense that I didn't run. That counts, Liam said, not joking, just acknowledging it. If you want to leave at any point, I'll go with you. The words "I'll go with you" softened something in Nora's chest. Just a little, but enough for her to sit down. The meeting began with numbers, square footage, budgets, timelines. A city representative stood up and talked about redevelopment the way someone might talk about replacing curtains. Clean, efficient, good for the area's image. Slides showed glossy renderings, glass, steel, a kind of beauty that felt empty. We will create new commercial space, increase revenue, upgrade the neighborhood, he said smoothly. An elderly woman in the front row shot to her feet. And what about the people sleeping under bridges? Are the families who need a place to eat dinner? You call this an upgrade? Scattered applause broke out. Nora stared at the red circle on the map. It felt as if someone were erasing a trace they didn't want to see. Nora was about to raise her hand, but Liam gently rested his hand on her arm, not restraining her, just reminding her. Wait, he whispered. They need to hear the right voice first. When the floor opened for community input, Liam stood up. He didn't need a microphone to command attention. Just by standing straight, the room grew quieter, as if everyone sensed this was someone used to speaking in life and death moments. I'm an ER doctor at the public hospital, Liam said, his voice clear, unforced. Every day I meet people this project labels as problems to be solved, but they are not problems, they are people. And Acacia has been a place that reduced the strain on our healthcare system, on the police, and on families who were already falling apart. He spoke in plain truths. Homeless people don't disappear when you demolish shelters. They just disappear from the sight of people who want things to look nice. He talked about hypothermia cases, about how a hot meal can keep someone from collapsing on the sidewalk. He didn't dramatize it, and that was precisely why it sounded real. Nora watched him and wondered, is this the voice Jenna talked about? A voice people couldn't ignore. When Liam sat down, Nora stood. I work at the library, she said, her voice trembling at first, then steadying. A public library doesn't just lend books. It's where children sit quietly when home isn't quiet. It's where adults look for jobs, learn a language, and apply for assistance. And Acacia once brought those people to us with something important, a chance to live with dignity. She didn't tell her own story. She didn't mention the clip. She spoke about children's reading programs, about rainy afternoons, about a child once asking, Miss, can I stay here a little longer? And Nora understood that the question wasn't about time. It was about shelter. As Nora spoke, she felt the earlier scrutiny pull back slightly. When people are forced to look at what you're protecting, they spend less time looking at what you're wearing. The meeting moved on to introducing the developer. A man stepped onto the stage. Gray suit, neatly combed hair, a smile trained for cameras. He held the microphone as if he had authority. "We understand the community's concerns," he said, "and we are committed to ensuring the project includes a humane element." On the screen appeared the company name, then the representative's name, bold and unmistakably sharp. Gordon Carter. The air in Nora's lungs seemed to harden. She turned to Liam instinctively. Liam had gone completely still. His expression barely changed, but Nora saw his jaw tighten as if something old and painful had just been dragged out of the ground. His hand clenched on his thigh, then released. "Liam," Nora whispered. He stared at the stage, unblinking. Then he said very quietly, as if he didn't want the word to touch the air, "My father." Nora didn't have time to react. In her mind, everything collided. Acacia, the photograph, the envelope, the project, and now, this man. A shared name, a bloodline, an abandonment. Coincidence had returned, and this time it wasn't gentle. It was sharp, cold. The meeting ended in controlled chaos. People arguing, signing petitions, and crowding around with questions. Nora gathered her papers, her hands trembling slightly. Liam stood close beside her, a silent wall. They had just stepped into the hallway when a woman in business attire approached and offered a business card. "Ms. Wren," she asked, smiling professionally, "Mr. Carter would like to meet with you privately, just briefly." Nora felt as if she had stepped into a different pocket of air. "He wants to meet me?" "Yes," the woman said, glancing quickly at Liam before turning back to Nora. "He believes you could collaborate on communications. Your story is getting attention, and our project wants to be told the right way." Nora looked down at the card, the crisp letters sharp as blades. She hadn't answered yet when Liam stepped half a step forward, his voice calm but unmistakably cold. "Don't." The woman paused for a moment, still smiling. "Dr. Carter, I was just—" "Don't," Liam repeated, clearer this time, drawing a firm line. Nora looked at Liam, then down the long hallway ahead, where the meeting room doors closed behind them like a full stop. And she understood this much. Gordon didn't just want to erase a place. He wanted to use her story of kindness to make it look clean. The meeting with Gordon Carter took place in a cafe so polished that Nora felt like an ink stain in the wrong place. Clear glass, pale wood, soft jazz carefully selected to make every conversation seem civilized. Gordon was already seated at a table near the window. Perfect gray suit, perfect smile. Even his espresso was perfect. The kind of perfection that made one wonder what was being concealed. Nora came alone. Liam had wanted to come with her, but she had shaken her head. Not because she wanted to face this by herself, but because she didn't want Liam to sit across from his own father like an old wound being forced open. Gordon stood when she arrived, impeccably polite. "Nora Wren, thank you for coming." Nora shook his hand briefly and sat down. "What did you want to see me about?" Gordon smiled as if he appreciated the directness. "I value people who speak plainly, so I'll do the same. Your story, the video, the date, the public reaction, is creating a wave." "That wave isn't something I asked for," Nora replied. "I understand," Gordon said, his voice velvet smooth, "but the wave exists nonetheless, and you could use it to do something good. The Acacia redevelopment project will be controversial, I won't deny that, but we can make it more humane. We want to include a community support center, a portion of space for reading programs, a grant fund for the library's reading initiatives." Nora heard the words the way one hears an advertisement written by someone who has never stood in line for a meal. She looked at Gordon. His eyes were bright, but the brightness belonged to someone calculating his next move. "And what would my role be in this humanity?" Nora asked. Gordon placed his hands on the table, fingers interlaced. "I want you to be the face of it. A campaign, a short video, an interview. You're the perfect symbol. A woman judged by her appearance, yet still kind-hearted. People will believe you." Nora almost laughed, not with humor but bitterness. "You want me to tell my story so people will hate the demolition of Acacia a little less?" Gordon didn't bristle. He merely tilted his head, as if Nora had said exactly what he wanted her to articulate. I want them to see the project as not being the enemy. I want them to see that we're listening. To Nora, it felt like someone spraying perfume into a burning room and calling it crisis management. She could smell it clearly. Whitewashed PR. I'm sorry, Nora said, her voice still polite but cooling. I can't help you make something wrong look right. Gordon blinked. His smile didn't disappear, but it thinned. You're calling it wrong without having seen the detailed plan. I don't need to see glass and steel renderings to know where the people who are there now will end up, Nora replied. You can build whatever you want, but you can't call it humane if it starts by erasing a place of shelter from the map. Gordon was silent for a beat. Then he shifted tone, softer, as if he were pulling back a different layer. Nora, you could save your library. You know that. We have the budget. We have the funds. If you cooperate, I can guarantee your reading programs survive. That was when Nora understood the real trap. Not the invitation, but a velvet-wrapped noose. Saving the library by selling her story to a project that was bleeding the community dry. Nora stood. I'll save the library in a way that doesn't require me to look down on myself. Gordon stood as well, polite to the very end. I respect your decision, but you should know the story will keep running, whether you're part of it or not. If you don't tell it, someone else will. Nora kept her expression composed, but the words clung to her like fine dust. On the way back, Portland rain fell like a string of question marks. Nora didn't text Liam right away. She needed a few minutes to breathe, to avoid unloading this anger onto him. But the moment she stepped into the library, Jenna rushed over like a living news alert. Have you seen this? Jenna said, shoving her phone toward her. The tabloids just posted. Nora looked at the screen. A headline designed to stab straight into doubt. ER doctor uses viral kindness girl to boost his reputation? Below it were vague, slippery paragraphs quoting anonymous sources, suggesting that Liam had deliberately approached Nora to build a compassionate doctor image, that the acacia photo was merely a prop in a carefully crafted narrative. Nora felt her stomach go cold. She kept reading, and then saw Trent's name among the first to share it, accompanied by a caption that was harmless on the surface and poisonous underneath. Just hope she's safe. Exactly Trent's style. No direct attack, just planting a seed. Nora stood in the middle of the library, gripping her phone, feeling as if someone had thrown a stone into the surface of a lake she had only just begun to believe was calm. She knew the article would spread, and she knew the most dangerous part of all. It wouldn't just hurt Liam. It would activate her deepest fear, the fear of being used. The article spread fast, like oil slicking across water. That morning, Nora walked into the library and found her name sitting in the inboxes of strangers. Some sent heart emojis, some sent insults, some asked for an exclusive interview, as if her emotions were a commodity. Nora tried to anchor herself to her work, to the books, the checkout cards, the sound of pages turning, but every time her phone vibrated, her heart jolted, as if her body were relearning an old reflex. Don't trust, don't get happy, don't let anyone come too close. Her boss called her into the office. On the desk lay a budget estimate, a few red marks, and a sentence delivered without detours. Nora, if we don't secure funding within a month, the children's reading program will be shut down. 1 month. The words sounded like a countdown clock. Nora nodded, saying, I understand. But in her mind, she saw children sitting in the reading corner, arms wrapped around books like life preservers. Saving the library meant using the viral attention, showing up, telling the story, enduring scrutiny. But holding on to her principles meant refusing to be used as a prop for a project that would erase Acacia. And right between those two poles, the article had driven a poisoned needle into her. What was Liam's motive for approaching her? Nora hated being dragged into suspicion, but she hated feeling foolish even more. She called Liam as soon as her afternoon shift ended. He answered immediately, his voice tired but warm. Nora, are you okay? I saw... Why did you approach me? Nora cut in, the question coming out harsher than she meant. Because of me? Or because of the story? Because of the compassionate doctor image? Silence on the line. Nora bit her lip until it hurt. She hated silence. It felt like an admission. Then Liam spoke, slowly, without defensiveness. "You're being forced to doubt, aren't you?" Nora swallowed. "I just need to know the truth." "You deserve to," Liam said. "Meeting you on the app was random. I didn't sign up to look for a benefactor. I was just living. But when I realized it was your eyes," he paused, "I got scared." "Scared of what?" "That you'd think I was strange. That you'd think I was using you." His voice dropped. "So I wanted to meet you as you are now first, not as a memory." Something inside Nora softened, but another part stayed rigid. "Then the photo, the envelope, you carried it with you, like something to—" "No," Liam said immediately, his voice firm. "I've carried it for years as a reminder. Not because you became famous, not because you could help me, because it reminds me that I was treated kindly when I had nothing." Nora closed her eyes. She heard the rain tapping against the library windows, steady and rhythmic, as if it were knocking on her defenses. "I want to believe you," she said more quietly, "but I also don't want to be stupid." "Believing isn't stupid," Liam replied. "Believing is brave, and you don't have to be brave alone." Another pause. This time it wasn't sharp, it was just heavy. "Where are you?" Nora asked. "At the hospital. I just finished my shift. But if you want to meet—" "I want to," Nora said almost immediately. 20 minutes later, Nora stood outside the ER, the white lights making everything brutally real. Liam came to meet her in the hallway, his coat thrown on hastily, dark circles under his eyes, but he still looked at her as if he were holding a calm center amid chaos. "I came here because of that question," Nora said. Liam nodded. "And I'm here to answer it by looking at you without turning away." They hadn't said more than that when a nurse rushed over, breathless. "Dr. Carter, your mother—" Liam turned instantly, his expression changing. "My mother?" Nora followed without thinking. They turned into a small room. On the bed lay a silver-haired woman, thin but still carrying a trace of pride. She was breathing fast, her eyes darting, as if she didn't know where she was. When she saw Liam, she calmed slightly, but then her gaze shifted to Nora, and stopped. Nora froze. The woman looked at her as if she were seeing a ghost pulled from memory. Marisol blinked repeatedly, as though dragging an image from a very distant place. Her lips trembled, then a very soft sound escaped. "Acacia!" Nora felt goosebumps rise on her skin. Liam stood beside the bed, his hand gripping the rail. Marisol looked at Nora for another second. Then something broke open, like water spilling over a dam. Tears fell, quietly but fast and many. She lifted a hand as if to touch the air in front of Nora, then pulled it back, as though afraid of breaking something. "The girl," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The girl who handed out soup, who looked at us, like people." Nora couldn't breathe. She didn't know whether to step back or forward. Her heart remembered the shelter more than any single face. But this moment made everything painfully real, impossible to label as PR. Liam turned to Nora, his eyes slightly red but steady. "This is my mother," he said, as if introducing the most important thing in his life. "Marisol." Marisol cried, and between sobs she looked at Nora as if clutching the last piece of light left in her memory. "Thank you," she said, the two words falling like a prayer. Nora stood there, her hands cold, her eyes burning, and she understood. Some truths don't need evidence. They reveal themselves in a mother's tears. Marisol drifted into sleep after a mild sedative, her breathing more even, her eyelids closed as if she had just finished a long stretch of running. The hospital room was quiet now, save for the steady tick of the heart monitor, like a small clock. Nora stood at the foot of the bed, her hands still cold despite the white lights flooding the space. She was still shaken by how a memory could surface through someone else's tears, and by the fact that the truth was too real to be staged. Liam guided her out into the hallway, where nurses' footsteps and overhead announcements formed a constant background noise. Here, there was no time for dramatics. Here, everything was stripped down to its essence. "I'm sorry," Liam said first, as if his greatest fault was letting her witness that moment. "You shouldn't have been pulled into my mother's situation like that." Nora shook her head. her voice quiet. I needed to see it. Otherwise, I would have kept torturing myself. Liam looked at her, eyes tired but clear. You want the truth, don't you? Yes, Nora said, and this time there was no detour. About everything. Liam leaned lightly against the wall, as if only now noticing that his body, too, had limits. My mom started losing her memory about a year and a half ago. At first it was just keys, medication names. Then it became bigger things. He swallowed. But there was one memory she wouldn't let go of. Acacia. Nora felt her throat tighten. Because that place saved your family. Yeah, Liam nodded. And in that memory, there's the volunteer girl. He exhaled, the corner of his mouth tightening into something that wasn't quite a smile. My mom talks about you the way she talks about a lifebuoy. She says there was a child who looked at them like people, not like trash. It sounds simple, but to my mom, a woman who swallowed humiliation to raise her child, that was what kept her from collapsing. Nora looked down at her hands. She remembered her mother once saying, "Don't pity," but she had never realized that "don't pity" could mean don't strip someone of their dignity in another person's life. So, Nora looked up. Why didn't you tell me earlier? From the very first date? Liam paused, then answered with a bluntness that made Nora hear the self-reproach beneath it. Because I was afraid you'd panic. Panic because you... No. Because you'd think I was looking for you to repay a debt, Liam said. Or worse, that I was clinging to you because of my mother. He met Nora's eyes. I didn't want you to become a symbol in my life. I wanted you to be a real person. Someone who could like me or dislike me for who I am now. Not because of a bowl of soup years ago. Hearing that, Nora suddenly saw her own test. Faded shirt, bare face, as something like a child's armor. I tested you, Nora said, her voice dry. Because I was afraid too. Liam nodded without judgment. I know. Nora gave a very small, almost tired laugh. I thought I was being clever, but really I was just protecting myself from the feeling of being judged. She paused. I'm not used to being treated kindly, without having to pay for it. Liam didn't say I won't hurt you, that kind of hollow promise. He only said, you weren't wrong to protect yourself. You just don't have to do it alone anymore. The words stopped Nora in place. Down the hall, a patient was being wheeled past, their hand gripping a loved one's tightly. Nora watched and suddenly understood. Life doesn't give anyone peace, but sometimes it gives you someone who stands beside you. Nora pulled out her phone. The screen was still open to the smear article Trent had shared. She looked at the headline once more, then shut it off, like extinguishing something that didn't deserve to breathe in her head. Trent is trying to plant doubt, Nora said, and Gordon is trying to use me. Liam tightened his grip on his bag strap. I know. Nora took a breath, deeper this time. I don't want to run anymore. Liam looked at her, waiting. Nora spoke slowly, as if laying bricks one by one. The library needs to live. Acacia needs to live. Viral is something I hate, but it's also something I can use the right way. She lifted her head, her eyes bright with decision rather than adrenaline. I'll step forward, not to be the face of Gordon's project, but to be the face of the truth. This city needs decent places. Liam looked at her as if she were something both frightening and beautiful. Are you sure? He asked, not in doubt, but the way a doctor asks a patient before they choose surgery. You know it will hurt, right? Nora nodded. I know it will hurt, but if I don't do this, the kids in the reading corner will lose their shelter, and people like your mom will be pushed out of sight again as if they never existed. Silence settled between them, no longer heavy but solid, like an agreement. Nora opened her notes app and typed quickly, Save Acacia plus Save Library. Beneath it, she wrote the first lines, book drive, petition, press statement, community night, hospital partnership, story hour livestream. The words didn't sparkle like destiny, but they were real. They were the way Nora knew how to live, by working for what she believed in. Liam looked at the screen, then at Nora. I'm with you, he said. Nora didn't laugh. She simply nodded, feeling as if she had stepped onto a narrow bridge. And this time, she wasn't crossing it alone. The campaign began with very small things, so small that Nora felt calmer because of it. A volunteer sign-up sheet on Google Forms, a black and white poster taped to the library door, a cardboard box labeled in marker book drive placed beside the circulation desk. But within 3 days, that small spark swelled like fire meeting wind. People brought books, worn children's books, novels full of underlines, cookbooks dusted with flour stains. A delivery driver set down a box and said gruffly, "I don't read, but my daughter once lived off the library." An elderly woman brought 10 hardcover books, her eyes red. "I was poor when I was young. The library raised me." The hospital joined in as well. Liam didn't step forward to play the hero. He simply sent an internal email and placed a donation box in the main lobby. But when an ER doctor speaks up, people listen differently. His colleagues shared the message, nurses spread the word, and even former patients returned with books in their hands. A small reading corner was set up right in the pediatric waiting area. Plastic chairs, a cheap wooden shelf, and storybooks that helped children fear the loudspeaker a little less. Nora watched it all, her chest tightening in a way that felt warm. Kindness, when it isn't forced into a performance, spreads on its own. Jenna moved like a real campaign manager, scheduling volunteers, responding to the press, reminding Nora to eat. "You just need to be you," Jenna said. "I'll handle the biting." On Thursday evening, they held a community gathering right inside the library. Bookshelves were pushed aside, chairs arranged in a circle. Unhoused people sat next to teachers, nurses beside the bakery owner. Nora stood up and spoke, not in slogans, just in truth. The library is a shelter. Acacia is a shelter. When shelters are erased, people don't disappear. They fall deeper. The applause was uneven, but real. And right in the middle of that realness, Trent appeared. He walked in as if he had just happened to stop by. Expensive coat, an understanding smile, a thick envelope in hand. Nora saw him and felt her stomach go cold, because she knew Trent never did anything without calculating his return. Trent walked straight toward Nora, speaking just loudly enough for others to hear. "I want to sponsor the reading program. You shouldn't have to carry all of this alone." Before Nora could respond, Trent handed the envelope to Jenna like a performance, then turned back to Nora, his eyes clearly seeking credit. Jenna didn't take it. She simply lifted the envelope, flipped it over once or twice, and asked directly, her voice gentle in a way that was unsettling. "Sponsorship is great, but what do you want?" Trent smiled. "I just want to help." Jenna nodded, as if she understood. "Then sign this." She held out a sheet of paper. "Donation agreement. Anonymous option. No credit, no press, no photo op. If you want to help, help for real. No name. No spotlight." Trent froze. That hesitation said more than any sentence. Someone in the circle let out a dry laugh. Another person spoke bluntly. "Oh, so you came for the image?" Trent flushed. He tried to recover. "I just thought transparency..." "Transparency is not using other people to get famous," a teacher cut in. Nora looked at Trent, and for the first time she didn't feel afraid. She felt clear. Clear that Trent wasn't worried about her. He was worried about the chance to stand next to a story that was trending. And the community saw it surprisingly fast. Trent left amid cold murmurs. No one followed. No one called after him. The library door closed behind him like the end of an old loop. 2 days later came the bigger confrontation. The meeting with the city and the developer took place in a large conference room with local cameras already set up. Gordon Carter sat at the head of the table, same gray suit, same practiced smile. He spoke of development, added value, and security. To Nora, it sounded like a lullaby meant to soothe resistance. Liam stood when it was his turn to speak. He didn't need anger. He only needed the right sentence. "Don't turn kindness into a prop." The room fell silent for a beat. Gordon looked at Liam, something flickering quickly in his eyes. Hard to tell whether it was irritation or being struck. Liam continued in the steady tone of a doctor stating facts. "You can build glass and steel, but you cannot call it humane if it begins by pushing the most vulnerable out of sight. Nora looked at Gordon. For the first time, his smile wasn't smooth. The meeting dragged on. Pressure from the community, from the media, from the growing pile of petition signatures bore down on the table. Finally, Gordon leaned toward the microphone, his voice shifting slightly, less promotional, more calculated. "We agreed to preserve part of the site," he said. "One area will be kept as a community hub." Nora exhaled as if surfacing from underwater. But before relief could settle, Gordon added his condition, clear as a barbed hook. "On one condition, Dr. Carter will stand with me before the media. We need the city to see cooperation." Liam went rigid. Nora felt the air in the room stall, like someone had muted the sound. Standing with Gordon meant what? Being used as proof of humanity, being pulled into a father-son wound in front of cameras, turning their campaign into a backdrop for Gordon's image. Nora looked at Liam and saw another battle in his eyes. Between saving Acacia at any cost and refusing to let his father turn kindness into a stage. Nora walked out of the meeting room with Liam in a silence stretched tight as a drawn wire. Outside, Portland rain fell thin but persistent. The kind of rain that didn't make noise, only seeped in. Streetlights reflected on the wet pavement in long bands of gold, mirroring the feeling in Nora's chest right now. Bright but drawn out like a worry she didn't yet know where to set down. "You didn't have to do that," Nora said as they stood beneath the awning, rain tapping softly against metal. She didn't say stand beside him, because even thinking it felt like swallowing a shard of glass. Liam stared out at the street before answering, his voice low and rough. "I didn't want to." "Then don't." Nora turned to him. Her eyes didn't tremble anymore. They held the kind of light that comes with resolve. "We just want a little. Don't let him turn it into a stage." Liam gave a very faint smile, not amused, but conceding that she was right. "I know what he wants. He wants to use me to stamp it with humane. He wants to turn Acacia into clean PR." Nora clenched her hand inside her pocket. "And if you stand there, people will believe he's listening, when really he's just buying back an image." Liam turned to look at her. In his eyes, a clear conflict played out. On one side, Acacia, a place that had once kept him and his mother from falling. On the other, the boundary between saving people and being used as a prop. Then he exhaled, as if finally choosing where to stand. "I'll stand there," Liam said. Nora stiffened. "Liam, but not the way he wants." Liam continued, his gaze steady. "I'll stand there to take the microphone, tell the truth, and set conditions in writing. No paperwork, no me. And if he thinks I'll smile for the cameras to make him look good, he's forgotten I'm an ER doctor. I'm used to speaking plainly when someone's bleeding." Nora looked at him for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Are you sure? Do you know what the cost will be?" Liam nodded. "I do. But the cost of silence is Acacia disappearing. My mom wouldn't survive that. And I don't want you carrying this alone." That night, they sat with Jenna in a late-night diner, surrounded by the smell of fries and bitter coffee. Jenna didn't talk much. She opened her laptop as a lawyer crossed with a strategist, typing out conditions the way one drafts a life-or-death contract. Nora watched the lines appear and felt, for the first time in her life, that viral wasn't something shameful. It was something she could control through clarity. Their conditions weren't flashy. Acacia's core must be preserved and legally transferred into a nonprofit hub model, governed by a board made up of residents, the library, and the hospital. No naming Gordon, no plaques or gold-lettered signs, transparent funding for operations. And most importantly, anyone displaced from Acacia must be provided with alternatives before a single brick was removed. "He'll lose his mind," Jenna said, eyes still on the screen. "He can lose it," Nora replied, her voice strangely calm. "But he doesn't get to look good by stepping on people and asking them to smile in gratitude." The next morning, a closed-door meeting took place. Gordon Carter sat at the head of the table, still the gray suit, still the practiced smile. But this time, his smile met something that didn't slide: Liam's eyes. "Preserving a portion is a significant gesture of goodwill," Gordon said. "Goodwill isn't enough," Liam replied. "I need commitment." Gordon raised an eyebrow. Are you making demands of me? I'm making demands of you, Mr. Carter, Liam said evenly. Not my father, because what you're trying to buy isn't real estate. You're trying to buy a story. The room went cold. Nora sat still, hands pressed against her thighs to keep them from shaking. She saw Gordon look at Liam the way one looks at a crack in glass, a crack that warps every reflection. You're choosing them over your family, Gordon said lightly. Liam didn't move. You left the family a long time ago. I'm choosing what's right. The words landed like a door being shut. Gordon fell silent, not the silence of offense, but of calculation. Media value, public pressure, cameras waiting outside. Finally, he leaned toward the documents. I'll sign, Gordon said, but you'll still stand beside me in front of the press. Liam nodded once. I'll stand, but I'll speak my part. No cuts, no edits. Gordon studied him. And what exactly do you plan to say? Liam answered calmly. The truth. The press conference took place that afternoon. Flashing lights, microphones, a backdrop stamped with city and investor logos. Gordon stepped forward, his voice smooth with rehearsal. We listen to the community. We respect human values. Nora stood in the back row, Jenna close beside her like a bodyguard. Nora didn't look at Gordon for long. She watched Liam. He stood straight, his calm so solid it demanded silence. As Gordon finished, he turned toward Liam, gesturing in a display of unity. Liam stepped up to the microphone. No smile, no nodding along. He looked into the camera, as if looking straight at the city. My name is Liam Carter, he said. I'm an emergency room physician at a public hospital. I'm standing here not to be a prop for anyone. A ripple ran through the reporters. Gordon faltered for a fraction of a second, then forced his controlled smile. Liam continued, his voice clear, not loud but heavy. Acacia saved my family when we were at the bottom. It saved many families when they were at the bottom. Places like Acacia are not problems to be cleaned up, so neighborhoods can look better. They are lifelines. He presented the signed commitment, not as a victory, but as a binding promise. This project proceeds only if Acacia's core is preserved and transferred into a reading and community care hub operated jointly by the library, the hospital, and local residents. No investor naming, no turning kindness into advertising. Gordon glanced over, his eyes darkening for a moment, then snapped back into his practiced composure. But Nora saw it clearly. He no longer controlled this stage. Liam ended with a sentence that silenced the room. If anyone wants to humanize a project, start by making sure the most vulnerable still have a place to stand, not by using their stories to sell an image. When Liam stepped away, there was no showy applause, just a strange, solid feeling. People had heard something that couldn't be cut into PR. It was a boundary spoken aloud. That evening, Nora met Liam at the hospital. He had just visited Marisol. His mother was more alert, looking at him like a son she had just received back. You didn't bow, Marisol said hoarsely. Good. Liam smiled, his eyes faintly red. I learned from you. Marisol looked at Nora and slowly took her hand. Thank you, she whispered, not only for the bowl of soup years ago, but for not running now. Nora left with a different feeling in her chest. Not victory, but lightness, as if they had reclaimed the right to tell the story in a decent way. The months that followed were filled with practical work, board meetings, permits, resource allocation, and volunteer recruitment. Viral faded, but what it left behind wasn't gossip. It was boxes of books, signatures, emails saying I want to help, and a signed commitment that couldn't be denied. A year later, Acacia Reading and Care Hub opened on a Saturday morning, the sky a soft gray like an unwritten page. The building wasn't glossy, but it was warm. Wide doors for wheelchairs, low shelves for children, a medical counseling corner divided by light wood, private enough without feeling pushed aside. At the entrance hung a small sign. Welcome home. No logos, no donor names. Nora stood at the doorway for a long moment. She wore fitted jeans, a cream sweater, and her hair tied low. No more proof outfit. She stepped inside like someone who knew she belonged. Inside the hub were children's laughter, the rustle of pages, the scent of hot coffee and new books. Liam moved through the small clinic area like someone who knew the paths, taking blood pressure, soothing a child afraid of needles, and reminding an elderly man to take his medication on time. He was still an ER doctor, still long shifts, still tired, but now he had a place to care in a way that didn't just pull people back from crisis, but help them keep living. Midway through the morning, Liam lightly touched Nora's elbow. "Can you come with me for a moment?" They stepped into the small courtyard behind the hub. Fine rain fell. Yellow string lights hung along the wall, swaying like tiny stars. On the table were 2 mugs of hot cocoa and a small box of pastries. Nora looked at him, half smiling, half suspicious. "Did you plan this?" Liam shrugged. "I know you forget to eat, and I wanted a moment with no one else." They sat. Nora wrapped her hands around the cocoa, the heat warming her fingers. She looked around the courtyard and thought, a year ago, they had been standing at the edge of being used as scenery. Now they were sitting in a place they had reclaimed, ordinary in the way that made it beautiful. Liam set his mug down and pulled a light brown craft envelope from his jacket. Nora paused on instinct, then noticed the way he offered it, careful without pressure. "Not like last time," Liam said softly. "I just want to close a circle." Nora took it and opened it. Inside was a new photograph, taken inside the hub. Nora bent down, handing a little girl a book, smiling without effort. Liam stood behind her with a box of books, looking at Nora with eyes as warm as yellow light. An ordinary moment, and beautiful, because it was ordinary. "Jenna took it," Liam said, as if anticipating the question. "She said we needed a decent memory." Nora flipped the photo over. Liam's handwriting appeared in black ink, steady and sure. "Kindness doesn't disappear. Sometimes it finds its way back." Nora's throat tightened. The words weren't flashy or romantic. They felt like a truth proven over time. Liam looked at her, then knelt on the slightly damp wooden floor, as simply as one kneels in life. No oversized ring box, just a small one, and a slender, delicate ring, light enough to stay on her hand without weighing down her life. "Nora," Liam said, his voice low as rain brushed his hair. "I stood in front of cameras to say that kindness shouldn't be turned into a prop. But what I want most is for that kindness to live in our home. I won't promise an easy life. I only promise I won't disappear, and that I'll choose you every day." Nora cried, then laughed through her tears, her voice shaking but clear. "Get up, doctor. This is Portland. Stay down there much longer, and you'll get pneumonia." Liam laughed and stood, still looking at her as if she were a place he belonged. Nora held out her hand. "Yes," she said. "Not because of destiny, because I chose it." Liam slipped the ring onto her finger. Nora rested her cheek against his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat, steady and real. At the doorway, Jenna popped her head in at just the right moment. One hand over her mouth, eyes shining, still managing to lift her phone. "Nobody says I'm not working." Nora laughed in Liam's arms. She looked again at the photo, read the words once more, and this time there was no impulse to retreat. Because she had seen it with her own eyes, kindness really doesn't disappear. It loops. It takes time. It gets tested by life. But if someone is brave enough to stand upright, before cameras, before the past, before their own fear, kindness will find its way back. And this time, Nora stayed to welcome it. An ordinary afternoon at the Acacia Reading and Care Hub doesn't look like the ending of any story. It looks more like real life, just loud enough, just warm enough, and busy in a quietly decent way. In the reading corner, children sprawl across the carpet, feet bumping into one another, competing to read sentences out loud as if words themselves could run. A little boy hugs a book about spaceships, misreads 3 words in a row, then looks up anyway, proud as if he's just landed on Mars. At a table near the window, a few elderly people drink tea, speaking softly like the wind. A long life folded neatly into gentle laughter and knowing nods. The medical corner stays lit. A nurse checks blood pressure. A resident takes notes. Liam passes by with a quiet reminder, like a hand resting briefly on a shoulder. Nora stands behind the counter, straightening a stack of flyers and a pile of returned books. She no longer dresses to prove anything. She dresses to work, to bend down to children's eye level, to hold an elderly woman when her test results come back better than expected. Her life still has tired days, but it's no longer the kind of exhaustion that drains her dry. It's the kind that knows it's doing something that matters. Marisol sits in her familiar armchair near the children's shelves, a warm cup of tea in her hands. Some days she calls Liam doctor instead of son. Some days she asks where Acacia is, as if she's never been here before. But every now and then, there are small moments, like windows opening. She looks at Nora for a long time, her eyes searching for a path through the fog. Nora's about to step closer to help when Marisol smiles, very faintly, and says the name correctly, Nora. Just one word, and Nora feels her heart warm as if it's been touched by a fireplace. Yes, she replies, sitting down beside her, not trying to stretch the moment, just letting it exist. On the wall across from the counter, Nora has hung two photographs side by side. One is old, a 15-year-old girl at Acacia Shelter, handing out meals, her gaze serious and straightforward. The other is new, her and Liam at the hub, smiling under yellow light, surrounded by boxes of books and the sound of children. Not a trophy? Look how far we've come. Just a circle quietly closed, complete and enough. Nora looks at the photos, then turns to see Liam carrying a box of books, Jenna directing volunteers like a conductor, and a child reading the final sentence of a story out loud. She touches the edge of the frame lightly, as if touching a promise that doesn't need to be spoken. Home is not the place where we are saved. Home is the place we choose to stay and become kinder.